Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Eternal news video. So we got a whole bunch of new spoilers to review, and in addition there will also be a really cool exciting Eternal news video coming up tomorrow with some sweet news, so stay tuned for that as well. Keep an eye out towards the evening probably. So let's focus on the review of the spoilers for now. First off, we have Crimson Firemaw. This card is super sweet, I think. What we get is a 4-cost 5/4 with flying for double fire. So fire finally has a good generic strong 4-drop unit. Groundbreaker was close, but the problem was that, first of all, the spark doesn't work for every deck as well, and the triple fire is pretty taxing on a 4-drop, so this is right there where we want it. This is basically a better Impending Doom in most cases. Sure, the 4 health can make a difference, but on the upside it doesn't ping you for 1 a turn, which can be pretty detrimental, and it has this huge upside, so whenever this hits an enemy player, it reduces the top card of your deck by 4 in cost. So this is amazing. Suddenly you will be drawing like 1-cost Obliterates, 3 other Crimson Firemaws, and basically if your curve stops at like 4 or 5, the cards that you will draw that aren't power will cost you 0 power. Which, to be fair, in an aggro deck is not that big of a deal, because at a certain point you will have more power than you have to spend anyway. But this does not only go in aggro. Like, imagine this in, for example, a Praxis deck with warp cards, making warp cards cost 4 less and then jamming them for cheap post-combat off the top of your deck, for example, and stuff like that. Seems pretty amazing. The card basically has no downside. 5/4 flying for 4 is pretty reasonable stat to cost ratio, and this amazing ability slapped on it for free makes it awesome. I can't wait to brew and experiment with this card. There's a lot of potential, and it's also just goes into a lot of decks very easily just for the stats, and then the ability is just like a nice bonus on top. Okay, let's move on to the next card. Right, so zoom out again. Next we have Waker of Vengeance. This is a bit of a tricky one, but it's kind of interesting, I think. First of all, gotta keep in mind that a 1/2 for 2 is basically not a relevant body, especially if the body has to live in order to provide the benefit. And in this case, we only have warp on our 5 strength plus units as long as Waker of Vengeance lives, so we cannot trade it away. We have to keep it alive. At least it's a 1/2, so it can install a bunch of random tokens and stuff like Temple Scribe, so it's not completely blank, but mostly it's just a relic, basically, that is more fragile. But in return, we get warp on our 5 attack units, which means on the Fire Mortar we just saw, on Sandstorm Titan, on Ember Monument, and a bunch of potential other cards. So there's definitely some interesting potential here. Probably doesn't go into any existing deck, but this might be a puzzle piece to make a more dedicated warp deck finally possible. It definitely makes me wanna try like a Warp Forge, Waker of Vengeance kind of deck, because now we would get to play more good cards that would also eventually get warp and get reduced in cost. Still have to see if it wouldn't be like a bit too dirtily, too fragile still, because playing more of these like slow, low impact cards like Waker of Vengeance and Warp Forge and everything. But yeah, now we can make up for it a lot better, so there is a fair share of potential here. And the card's definitely interesting to experiment with, but I'm not sure if it's gonna be hot or not. Testing we'll have to see. But it's definitely interesting and something that has appeal to brew with. Next we have Kindle. So for everyone that played Magic long enough, Eternal is getting its own slightly different version of Seething Song. So what this does basically is it accelerates you by 1, guaranteed, and if you can spark it, it accelerates you by 2. And unlike Seething Song, this has the upside of, thanks to the influence system, not provide you with only power of 1 color, because that's not possible in this game. It just gives you generic power, so it lets you accelerate all kinds of cards. Like you can accelerate into a turn 10 8 of the Horror with this, for example, which you probably won't, because it's really hard to spark it in a deck that runs 8 of the Horror, and it's also a bit ambitious. But it also lets you accelerate into a 4-drop on turn 3, which can be powerful in aggressive decks with powerful 4-drops, like the new Firemaw, for example. Getting that out a turn earlier is a pretty big reward. Or even getting that out on turn 3 and playing like a 1-drop in addition. The problem is a bit that the spark makes it a bit awkward, because if you think of some of the nicer 5-drops to pair this with, would be, for example, Soulfire Drake and Obliterate, and both of these are cards that you want to play pre-combat, so this only accelerates them by a turn usually, which is not as great. But yeah, the card has a fairly high ceiling and some potential, and I think it's definitely interesting. It's also interesting with Warp, because Warp makes up for the lost card economy while allowing you to warp more expensive cards off the top of your deck that you otherwise would have to draw, because you couldn't, you don't have the power to play them yet. So this is definitely interesting synergy with Warp. And yeah, there's always potential to do broken stuff with this kind of effects, and you can reduce it in cost with trade stories even further. So if you really want to like throw away cards to get ahead on power, you can do so, and this has a lot of interesting implications, and I'm curious to see how this plays out and brew with this as well. So this adventure is already looking so much better and more interesting and more impactful than Jake's Bounty was, so this is pretty exciting. Alright, next card. Dueling Pistols. This card might not seem that exciting at first glance, but I think it has a lot of potential actually, especially with some of the spoilers we've seen after this has been released. But even if not, like, keep in mind this is still basically like 4-2 in stats for 4 and quick draw, which is a pretty good rate. I mean, that's like a solid 4-drop in stats already. And yeah, basically being able to make it sort of a 2-for-1, make one of your bigger guys bigger and give it quick draw, so that it is basically impossible to stop in combat, and at the same time reduce their chances of ever stopping it in combat by shrinking or killing one of their guys. Definitely decent, and like the fact that it gives -2/-2 to a unit also makes up a bit for the fact that you're spending your turn 4 equipping a 2/0 quick draw weapon to a unit. But yeah, this looks like one of the more interesting and appealing weapons for like a more mid-rangey Minotaur Argentport type stuff, and definitely not completely irrelevant for Constructed. This is also something that I'm definitely gonna look into and see what can be done with it. And next we have another Minotaur. Copperhull Paladin. It's a 3/4 with lifesteal, and whenever you play a weapon on it, you can play a Justice Sigil depleted from your deck. I think the card has a bit of a weird identity crisis and is a bit torn in many directions. 3/4 for 4, bit undercosted. 3/4 in lifesteal makes it more of a like defensive kind of stabilization type unit, but the stats make it kind of like slow and not super tempo efficient. Then the fact that it wants you to put a weapon on it makes it more of an offensive unit, because in like more mid-rangey, slower defensive decks, weapons are not that good. which brings me back to Dueling Pistols. This is one of the better targets for it. Problem is both are 4-drops, that makes it a bit awkward. And then yeah, you get this like weird ramp effect out of it, which I wouldn't really know what I would ramp into, because basically you ramp from 5 to 7. I don't know, maybe it wants to be paired with, I don't know, a Zindel's Gift to help ramp into that, and like some weird Argentport Minotaur mid-range deck. Would have to try, not sure. Definitely skeptical there. But yeah, the card is a bit weird, and it's also like another Minotaur 4-drop among other Minotaur 4-drops like Lighthoof and the 4-drop Lord with Revenge that gives +2/+0 to all Minotaurs, making this not curve nicely with anything at the moment. So yeah, not super stoked about this, but maybe it'll find a home. And last but not least, we have a new legendary spoiled. Basically, the Jack Bounty Hunter, or Nyctotraxion of the new adventurer. So we can probably expect to see like at least another legendary, based on what we know from Jax. But yeah, this is basically more interesting and better than both. It's pretty aggressively costed. Gives us a 5/7 endurance for 5. So basically a Titan with +1 health and minus the evasion suppression, which is reasonable, also given that Titan is in time and being overstated and undercosted is sort of time thing. In Argentport, 5/7 for 5 with endurance is definitely more impressive than it would be in time. And then there's like this value application. So every time it attacks, you can draw a Minotaur and a weapon from the top 5 cards of your deck and give them +5/+0 and discard the rest. So this means not only weapons but also relic weapons, if I'm not mistaken. So getting cards like an Auric Runehammer with this as a 9/1 is incredibly powerful. And then yeah, there's like Minotaurs, like it can hit itself, and there's a bunch of other Minotaurs with implications for a deck like this, or like a mid-rangey Minotaur deck. And yeah, this card is a powerhouse, and even without that many things to hit, it still occasionally, when it hits, is super powerful. You can even have Privilege of Rank in the deck, because if it gets milled this way, you can play it for free, and so on. There's a lot of nice things going on here. And the guy is stabilized super hard, like a 5/7 endurance just completely locks down the board, and also it's multi-faction unlike Titan, so it doesn't die to annihilate. So the amount, and it costs 5, so it doesn't die to banish. So the amount of cards that answer this are actually not that high. Like it's basically yeah, and permafrost doesn't work either because of the endurance. So it's basically only slay and vanquish at this point. And that makes it pretty reliable and stabilizing in general. So yeah, that card looks definitely interesting and appealing, and I'm excited to try it. Alright, that's it again for the latest spoilers. This adventure is looking super cool and interesting, and also pretty impactful for Constructed. Can't wait to try all these cards and brew with them. I would expect we get the adventure by the end of the coming week, like Thursday or Friday, probably. At least that's what I would hope. And I think it's pretty likely at this point. I think we've seen a lot of cards already spoiled, and they might not even spoil all, I think 23 cards that it's going to be. So the regular downtime time of Thursday or Friday the coming week seems like a reasonable expectation. Alright, that's it for the Eternal News. Don't forget there's another Eternal News with some sweet news coming up tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. Keep an eye out, turn on your notifications, and as usual, if you liked this review and news video to keep you up to date, please consider subscribing for future videos, and also drop a like below. And as usual, you can find all further information you need in the description. Thanks for watching. See you soon.